actually started before the lockdown on a major improvement and redevelopment scheme of the buildings here. In fact, we had the first stage of it was open for our 30th anniversary gala, which was in the end of August 2019, so in other words a few months before the lockdown. And then we continued during the lockdown with building a new overall roof which joined together the original two main museum and rolling stock buildings, and then carried on by extending the loco and carriage shed by about 50%. So all in all, we've increased the amount of covered space here, well, approximately doubled it. It's a very large and very varied display. We've obviously got rolling stock in the museum part, which is, strictly speaking, it is a carriage shed really. So there are a number of carriages, early, largely, partly pre-grouping ones, which in themselves contain large collections of memorabilia of all sorts. There's a large signalling section, again something which we had in the original museum, but which has now considerably expanded. And we've got the Halesworth signal box, which we already got a couple of signal boxes outdoors, but this one we had the opportunity of obtaining the Halesworth signal box, which is quite historical in itself. It's quite historical from our point of view as well, because the original idea of building this museum came out of conversations that we had with my friend and at that time signalman at Halesworth back in the 1980s. And much later, and after all sorts of twists and turns in the signal box's history, we've actually been able to obtain the signal box and put it up inside the building. So it's completely secure from both weather and vandalism and so forth, which were unfortunately the problems it had suffered in its previous home. The upper section, the working floor of the signal box, we've restored it almost exactly as it was when it was last in use at Halesworth in the mid-1980s. But the lower section, which would normally contain the workings of the signals, we've used that to display a large collection of largely Great Eastern and Midland and Great Northern Joint Railway signal box diagrams. Restoration shed, or the engine shed as we tend to call it, which was purely a workshop before with no public access to it. We have now arranged at least limited public access in there, because that was always a complaint that you can go to Mangapps but you don't see any of the engines, but actually you can see most of the engines now undercover inside the shed, added to which of course it makes working on them much easier, and means that some of the more delicate pieces of rolling stock can be kept in there long term to prevent them falling to pieces. It was one of the great challenges of railway preservation, preventing locos and rolling stock from falling to pieces, and you can really only do that by keeping them under cover. For a number of years, when we first started the railway here, we started off with small diesels, class 03s and 04s, which are still the backbone of our operations, because they're reasonably easy to maintain, they're very efficient in terms of fuel, and yet they do the job that we want them to do here perfectly. But because obviously there is a lot of interest in big diesels, in particular my son and business partner James is very interested in big diesels. He started the ball rolling by purchasing a class 47 back in 2007, James Knighthall GC, which we still own, and which is now on loan to the Mid-Hants Railway. It's been there now for, it was supposed originally to go there for 3 years, it's now been there for 4 years, but because of the COVID lockdown and so forth, we've extended their loan over there, over at Alresford. In the meantime, we felt that we ought to have at least one more large diesel. We had the opportunity of buying one or other of the last two Class 31s belonging to Network Rail, in fact the last two 31s that were belonging to a national railway organisation. We in fact went ahead and bought both of them, so that we've got one and an inexhaustible supply of spares as well. So there's now two Class 31s now which live over in the engine shed. We now have a total of four O3s that are in running order or close to running order, plus another one which requires further more drastic restoration, and an operational Class 04 as well. So I think we're fairly adequately covered for regular running locomotives.